Let's start with a fact that should outrage every American. We pay 2 to 3 times more for prescription drugs than citizens of any other developed nation. A vial of insulin that costs $30 in Canada costs $300 here. The same cancer drug priced at $1,000 in Germany costs $10,000 in America. This is indefensible, and I say that as a free market conservative. But here's where I part ways with my Democratic colleagues. The solution isn't government price controls or Medicare for all schemes that would destroy pharmaceutical innovation. America produces 60% of the world's new drugs precisely because our market rewards innovation. Price controls in Europe and Canada mean those countries' free ride on American research and development. The real problems are market failures we can fix without killing innovation. Pharmacy benefit managers extracting hidden fees, patent abuse extending monopolies decades beyond their purpose, FDA bureaucracy delaying generic competition, and lack of price transparency preventing consumers from shopping for value. We need to unleash market forces, not suppress them. When we remove the middlemen gaming the system, streamline generic approvals, and give patients real price information, competition will drive costs down while preserving the innovation that saves lives. Government price setting would give us cheaper drugs today at the cost of cures tomorrow.
Tom, I appreciate your acknowledgement that American drug prices are indefensible. That's not something I always hear from Republicans. But let's be honest about why markets have failed here. Pharmaceutical companies aren't operating in a free market. They're operating in a government-created monopoly system called patents. They use that monopoly power to charge whatever the market will bear, which in healthcare means whatever desperate patients will pay to stay alive. Your faith in competition is admirable but naive in this context. The insulin market has 3 manufacturers who've raised prices in lockstep for decades. That's not competition. That's tacit collusion. Generic drugs should provide competition, but brand manufacturers pay generic companies to delay entering the market. PBMs were supposed to negotiate lower prices, but instead created opaque systems that benefit themselves, not patients. The free market isn't going to fix market failures this severe. Every other developed nation uses government negotiation or price regulation to control drug costs, and they still have pharmaceutical innovation. Germany has robust drug pricing oversight and a thriving pharmaceutical industry. The UK's National Health Service negotiates prices, and British patients still get new drugs. The idea that any government involvement destroys innovation is pharmaceutical industry propaganda, not economic reality. We need Medicare negotiation for the costliest drugs, and we need it now. Seniors are rationing insulin while drug companies post record profits.
Lily, you're conflating several different problems and prescribing government control as the universal solution. Let me separate these issues because they require different fixes. You're right that the insulin market is broken. 3 companies controlling 90% of a century-old drug is a regulatory failure, not a market outcome. But the solution isn't price controls. It's removing barriers to competition. The FDA's biosimilar approval process is needlessly complex, and insulin manufacturers have used patent thickets, dozens of minor patents on delivery devices and formulations to block competitors. Strip away those artificial barriers, and generic insulin would cost $30 here too. On PBMs, we're in complete agreement. They're extracting an estimated $100 billion annually through hidden rebates and spread pricing, none of which benefits patients. This is a transparency and regulation problem. Require PBMs to operate as fiduciaries for patients, pass through 100% of rebates, and disclose all fees. That's not government price setting. That's basic market transparency. Here's where I'll meet you partway on negotiation. Medicare Part D's non-interference clause, which prohibits Medicare from negotiating drug prices, made sense when we wanted private plans to compete. But the market has consolidated to where that competition doesn't work. I'm open to limited Medicare negotiation for drugs with no competition, but with guardrails protecting innovation. Let's not pretend European price controls are costless. Those countries get new drugs later, and their pharmaceutical industries have declined while America's thrives.
Now we're getting somewhere, Tom. Your willingness to consider Medicare negotiation for drugs without competition is a significant move from the standard Republican position. And you're absolutely right about PBMs. They've become parasites on the healthcare system, extracting value without creating any. Let me build on your PBM reforms. Require complete transparency in all rebate arrangements. Ban spread pricing where PBMs pocket the difference between what they charge plans and pay pharmacies, and require that rebates flow to patients at the point of sale rather than disappearing into insurer premiums. This alone could save patients $30 to $50 billion annually. On your innovation concerns regarding negotiation, let's address them directly. I propose negotiation with guardrails. Medicare negotiates prices for drugs that have been on the market for at least 9 years for small molecules or 13 years for biologics, have no generic competition, and exceed a spending threshold. This protects the exclusivity period where companies recoup R&D investment while addressing drugs that have long since paid for themselves but maintain monopoly pricing. The negotiated price would be based on clinical value. How much better is this drug than alternatives, not arbitrary government fiat? And we can include an off-ramp. If manufacturers invest negotiated savings into R&D for diseases with unmet needs, they receive tax credits. This way, we're recycling savings into future innovation rather than just cutting costs. We're not copying Europe's system. We're creating an American solution that balances access and innovation.
Lily, your negotiation framework with innovation guardrails is thoughtful. The 9-year and 13-year thresholds protect the exclusivity period while addressing legacy drugs, and value-based pricing is more defensible than arbitrary caps. I can work with that structure. But we need to tackle patent abuse simultaneously, or companies will just extend monopolies to avoid negotiation. Right now, pharmaceutical companies file dozens of patents on minor modifications, new coatings, different doses, combination products, that extend market exclusivity decades beyond the original patent. Humira has over 130 patents, most filed after the drug launched, blocking biosimilar competition for years beyond the original exclusivity period. This is legal gaming of a system meant to reward genuine innovation. Here's my proposal. Limit the number of patents that can extend exclusivity beyond the original term. Create a dedicated patent review board for pharmaceuticals that can invalidate patents that don't represent genuine innovation. And end pay-for-delay settlements where brand manufacturers pay generic companies to stay out of the market. These cost consumers an estimated $3.5 billion annually. Combine patent reform with your negotiation framework, and we address both the front end and back end of the monopoly problem. Drugs face price negotiation after exclusivity, while patent gaming can't artificially extend that exclusivity. This preserves innovation incentives during the legitimate patent period while ensuring competition eventually arrives.
Tom, your patent reform proposals would fundamentally change the pharmaceutical landscape for the better. Limiting patent evergreening and banning pay-for-delay addresses the artificial extension of monopolies that costs patients billions. The Specialized Pharmaceutical Patent Board could finally provide meaningful review rather than rubber-stamping minor modifications as genuine innovation. Now let me add the other side of the competition equation, dramatically accelerating generic and biosimilar approvals. The FDA has a backlog of over 1,000 generic drug applications, some waiting 5 or more years for approval. Every day of delay costs patients money and costs lives. We should double FDA generic drug review staff, create a priority pathway for generics entering monopoly markets, and set binding approval timelines with accountability. For biosimilars, the generic equivalents of complex biologic drugs, we need even more aggressive action. Biosimilars can reduce costs by 40 to 60%, but face enormous barriers, complex approval processes, physician unfamiliarity, and insurance company resistance, often driven by rebate arrangements with brand biologics. Require that Medicare and Medicaid cover biosimilars preferentially when available. Mandate physician and pharmacist education on biosimilar equivalents, and ban rebate contracts that favor brands over biosimilars. Between your patent reforms limiting monopoly extension and my approval acceleration bringing competition faster, we can dramatically reduce the period of monopoly pricing without touching the legitimate exclusivity that rewards innovation.
Let me describe what a functioning pharmaceutical market could look like, because we don't have one now. In a real market, patients would know drug prices before prescriptions are written, could compare costs across pharmacies, and would understand their out-of-pocket responsibility up front. Physicians would have real-time price information in their prescribing systems and could discuss cost-effective alternatives with patients. Insurance would have straightforward cost sharing that patients can understand and predict. None of this exists today. Drug prices are hidden behind complex rebate systems. Patients often don't know what they'll pay until they're at the pharmacy counter. Physicians prescribe blind to cost. This isn't a market. It's a maze designed to obscure information. Here's what transparency reform looks like. Require real-time drug pricing in electronic health records, so physicians see costs when prescribing. Mandate that pharmacies provide price comparisons across payment options. Sometimes paying cash is cheaper than using insurance, but patients don't know. Require that patients receive cost estimates before prescriptions are filled. Create standardized pharmacy benefit explanations so patients can actually compare plans. And most importantly, require that all rebates and discounts flow to patients at the point of sale, not into insurer premiums or PBM profits. When patients can see prices and shop for value, competition will drive costs down. That's not ideology. That's basic economics that we've somehow failed to apply to prescription drugs.
Tom, I'm completely with you on price transparency. Patients and physicians operating in the dark is indefensible, and the solutions you describe would genuinely help. But let me explain why transparency alone isn't sufficient for this market. When you need a specific cancer drug to survive, you're not a consumer shopping for value. You're a hostage. Transparency tells you the ransom amount, but doesn't give you bargaining power. You'll pay whatever is demanded because the alternative is death. This is why healthcare markets are fundamentally different from consumer markets, and why every other developed nation uses collective bargaining power to negotiate drug prices. Individual patients have no leverage. The government representing 65 million Medicare beneficiaries has enormous leverage. Here's how we make transparency meaningful. Combine it with collective negotiation. Once prices are visible, Medicare uses its purchasing power to negotiate fair prices for drugs without competition. Those negotiated prices become benchmarks that inform the entire market. Private insurers can use them as reference points. Now transparency has teeth. I'll also add transparency requirements for pharmaceutical company pricing decisions. Require disclosure of actual R&D costs for specific drugs, not industry-wide averages. Require justification for price increases exceeding inflation. Make companies defend their pricing with data, not talking points. Transparency cuts both ways. Patients see prices, and companies must justify them.
Lily, you make a fair point about leverage. Individual patients can't negotiate with pharmaceutical companies, and I'll concede that Medicare negotiation for specific drugs without competition, with the guardrails we discussed, is a reasonable exercise of that collective leverage. But I want to address the international pricing comparison, because it's central to this debate. Yes, Americans pay more than Canadians or Germans for the same drugs. But there's a reason for that beyond corporate greed. Those countries are free-riding on American innovation investment. They use government price controls to limit what they pay. And pharmaceutical companies accept those prices because the marginal cost of producing additional pills is low. But they make their profits in America, and those profits fund R&D for the next generation of drugs. If America adopted European-style price controls, pharmaceutical R&D investment would collapse, and everyone would suffer from fewer new drugs. Here's my alternative. International reference pricing with an American innovation premium. Set U.S. prices based on an average of what other developed nations pay, plus a 20 to 30% premium that reflects our proportional contribution to global pharmaceutical R&D. This would still reduce American prices significantly. We currently pay 200 to 300% more, so even a 30% premium above international averages would be a massive reduction. But it maintains the innovation incentive while ending the most extreme pricing disparities. Other countries should pay more for drugs and America should pay less, meeting somewhere in the middle that fairly distributes the costs of innovation.
Tom, your international reference pricing proposal is genuinely creative and addresses the free rider problem thoughtfully. I'd even argue the 20 to 30% innovation premium is defensible. If we're contributing disproportionately to global R&D, some premium is reasonable. But let's combine it with our negotiation framework for maximum impact. Here's how they work together. For drugs with generic or biosimilar competition, market forces plus our transparency reforms drive prices down. For drugs without competition that are within exclusivity periods, international reference pricing with the innovation premium sets reasonable prices that still reward innovation. For drugs without competition that have exceeded exclusivity periods, Medicare negotiates prices based on clinical value, with reference pricing as a backstop. This creates a comprehensive system where every drug faces some price discipline without arbitrary government caps destroying incentives. The innovation premium ensures American patients aren't subsidizing the world alone, while negotiation and reference pricing end the most egregious pricing abuses. Let me add one more element: inflation caps on existing drugs. Once a drug is priced at launch, whether through reference pricing, negotiation, or market competition, annual price increases are capped at inflation. No more 500% price hikes on decades-old medications. Companies set launch prices knowing they need to be sustainable, and patients are protected from exploitation over time. This is pro-market at launch, pro-patient over time.
Let me outline what comprehensive PBM reform should look like, because this is an area where government regulation is absolutely appropriate. PBMs were created to negotiate lower drug prices for insurers and patients. That's a legitimate market function. But they've evolved into extractive intermediaries that profit from higher prices, not lower ones. They receive manufacturer rebates but keep a portion, or all, rather than passing savings to patients. They use spread pricing to charge insurers more than they pay pharmacies, pocketing the difference. They steer patients toward higher-cost drugs that provide larger rebates rather than therapeutically equivalent cheaper alternatives. This isn't a free market. It's a market failure requiring correction. Here's the reform package. First, require PBMs to operate as fiduciaries with legal obligation to act in patients' best interest, not their own profit. Second, mandate 100% pass-through of all rebates to the point of sale, so patients benefit directly from manufacturer discounts. Third, ban spread pricing entirely. PBMs must be transparent about what they charge plans versus what they pay pharmacies. Fourth, prohibit steering patients toward higher rebate drugs when therapeutically equivalent cheaper options exist. Fifth, require full disclosure of all PBM revenue sources so plans can evaluate whether their PBM is actually saving money. These aren't price controls. They're transparency and fiduciary requirements that would apply to any financial intermediary. We're not telling PBMs what to charge. We're telling them they can't hide what they charge.
Tom, your PBM reform package is exactly what's needed, and I think it could pass with bipartisan support because the only opposition will be from PBMs themselves. Everyone else benefits. Let me build on it with insurance design reforms that ensure patients actually benefit from lower drug costs. Right now, patient cost sharing is often based on list prices rather than net prices after rebates, so even when PBMs negotiate lower prices, patients don't benefit. Worse, many plans put drugs in high-cost tiers with coinsurance. Patients pay a percentage of the price, so patients' costs rise even when insurers get rebates that reduce their costs. Reform should require that patient cost sharing be based on the net price after all discounts, not the inflated list price. Cap out-of-pocket costs for essential medications like insulin. No patient should pay more than $35 per month for insulin, regardless of insurance status. Smooth cost sharing throughout the year rather than front-loading. Too many patients abandon medications in January when deductibles reset. And here's one that will be controversial. Restructure the Medicare Part D benefit to align incentives properly. Right now, once patients hit catastrophic coverage, Plans pay only 15%. Most costs shift to Medicare. This removes any incentive for plans to negotiate hard on the most expensive drugs. Increase plan liability and catastrophic coverage so plans have financial incentive to manage high-cost drugs effectively.
Lily, your Part D restructuring to increase plan liability for catastrophic costs is smart policy that aligns incentives without government price setting. When plans bear more financial risk for expensive drugs, they'll negotiate harder. That's market pressure, not government mandates. And smoothing cost sharing throughout the year would prevent the January medication abandonment crisis that harms patients and increases long-term healthcare costs. Here's what I'd add on the patent side to complement our earlier discussion. Create a comprehensive patent reform package specifically for pharmaceuticals. Limit the number of patents that can be filed after initial approval to prevent evergreening. Create expedited challenges for patents that don't represent genuine innovation. Require patent disclosure at the time of FDA approval so generic manufacturers know what they're dealing with. And critically, authorize the FDA to grant tentative approval to generics while patent disputes are pending, so the day patents are resolved, generics can launch immediately. We also need to address the drug pricing justification you mentioned. When manufacturers increase prices beyond inflation or launch drugs at very high prices, require them to submit justification to a review board, not for approval, but for public disclosure. Include R&D costs for that specific drug, manufacturing costs, marketing costs, and comparison to international prices. Transparency won't directly lower prices, but it will create public accountability that influences corporate behavior. No company wants headlines about charging Americans 5 times what they charge Canadians for the same pill with no justification.
Tom, I love the patent reform package, especially expedited challenges for non-innovative patents and tentative generic approval during disputes. These would accelerate competition without requiring any government pricing authority. And the pricing justification disclosure creates accountability through transparency rather than regulation, very much in the spirit of your market principles. Let me add the final piece on generic and biosimilar acceleration. Create an FDA priority pathway specifically for generics entering markets with limited competition. If fewer than 3 manufacturers make a drug, generic applications get priority review with a 6-month approval target. Staff this pathway adequately, which means funding FDA through appropriations rather than industry user fees that can create conflicts of interest. For biosimilars specifically, we need additional support. Create a designation for biosimilars that pass interchangeability standards, allowing pharmacy-level substitution without physician approval, just like generics. Fund an educational campaign for physicians and patients about biosimilars' safety and efficacy, and prohibit the rebate walls that brand biologics use to keep biosimilars off formularies, even when they're significantly cheaper. The combination of your patent reforms preventing artificial monopoly extension and my approval acceleration bringing competition faster would transform the generic and biosimilar marketplace within 3 to 5 years. More competition means lower prices without any government price setting.
Let me summarize the comprehensive plan Lily and I have built together, because I think we've actually solved this. We started far apart. I was skeptical of government negotiation, she was skeptical of market solutions, but we've created something that incorporates the best of both approaches while addressing the structural problems driving high drug costs. Point 1. Complete price transparency throughout the pharmaceutical supply chain. Real-time pricing and prescribing systems, pharmacy price comparisons, standardized benefit explanations, and rebates flowing to patients at the point of sale. Markets only work with information, and we'll finally have it. Point 2. Comprehensive PBM reform. PBMs operating as fiduciaries, 100% rebate pass-through, banned spread pricing, prohibited steering to high rebate drugs, and full revenue disclosure. This ends the extractive middleman problem without price controls. Point 3. Patent reform ending evergreening and abuse. Limited patents after initial approval, expedited invalid patent challenges, required patent disclosure, tentative generic approval during disputes, and banned pay-for-delay settlements. Competition arrives when it should, not decades later. Point 4. Medicare negotiation with innovation guardrails. Negotiation for drugs without competition that have exceeded exclusivity periods, based on clinical value with international reference pricing as benchmarks. The innovation premium ensures America maintains its leadership while ending the most extreme pricing abuse.
And I'll complete the 7 points and explain why this comprehensive plan actually works. Point 5. Generic and biosimilar acceleration. FDA priority pathway for generics entering monopoly markets with 6-month approval targets. Biosimilar interchangeability designation, allowing pharmacy substitution, physician and patient education on biosimilar efficacy, and banned rebate walls favoring brands over biosimilars. Competition arrives faster and captures market share. Point 6. Insurance design reform. Patient cost sharing based on net prices rather than inflated list prices. Capped out-of-pocket costs for essential medications like insulin at $35 monthly. Smoothed cost sharing throughout the year, preventing January abandonment. And restructured Part D to increase plan liability for catastrophic costs, aligning their incentives with patients. Point 7. International reference pricing with innovation premium. U.S. prices based on average of other developed nations plus 20 to 30% premium, reflecting our R&D contribution with annual inflation caps on existing drugs. Fair pricing that maintains innovation incentive while ending the most extreme disparities. Here's why this comprehensive approach succeeds where piecemeal reforms have failed. Each point reinforces the others. Transparency enables competition and negotiation. Patent reform ensures competition arrives. Negotiation addresses monopoly pricing. Insurance reform ensures patients benefit from savings. International reference pricing provides backstop discipline. No single policy solves the problem, but together they create a system where every drug faces price discipline through appropriate mechanisms, while innovation incentives remain intact.
Let me outline implementation. Because even the best policy fails without a realistic pathway to enactment. Phase 1. Immediate legislation within 6 months. Price transparency requirements and PBM reform. These have broad bipartisan support, face opposition only from PBM industry, and deliver visible patient benefits quickly. Build political momentum with early wins. Phase 2. Year 1. Patent reform and FDA acceleration for generics. More complex legislation but largely technical, rewriting patent rules and FDA procedures rather than contentious philosophical debates. Generic and biosimilar companies become allies in this effort. Phase 3, years 1 through 2, Medicare negotiation with the guardrails we've established and international reference pricing. These face strongest pharmaceutical industry opposition, but by then we'll have demonstrated results from earlier reforms and built public support. Include the innovation premium and R&D investment credits to fracture industry opposition. Some companies will support the deal. Phase 4, years 2 through 3. Insurance design reforms including Part D restructuring. Requires CBO scoring and may need budget reconciliation, but by then negotiation savings help offset costs. Throughout implementation, measure results. Generic entry speed, patient out-of-pocket costs, drug price increases versus inflation, biosimilar market share, and pharmaceutical R&D investment. Adjust policies based on evidence, not ideology. Sunset and review provisions ensure we're achieving goals.
What makes this plan politically achievable is that it addresses the legitimate concerns of both parties while keeping patients at the center. Conservatives get market-based solutions where possible. Transparency, competition, choice, with regulation only for genuine market failures. They get innovation protection through the premium and R&D investment incentives. They get federalism with state flexibility in implementation. Progressives get real price discipline through negotiation, reference pricing, and PBM reform. They get patient protections through out-of-pocket caps and insurance design reforms. They get equity, as lower prices benefit those who struggle most to afford medications. And both sides get credit for actually solving a problem that's been festering for decades, while politicians just pointed fingers. The American people are desperate for leaders who can work across the aisle to fix things that are obviously broken. This plan is that opportunity. The opposition will come from PBMs protecting their profits and some pharmaceutical companies resistant to any change. But individual companies may support this deal because it provides certainty and maintains innovation incentives. Smaller biotechs benefit from the framework. Generic manufacturers strongly support it. Patient groups support it. Employers and insurers support it. The coalition for reform is larger than the coalition for the status quo. What it requires is political courage, willingness to tell entrenched interests that the exploitation is over, while assuring innovators that America remains the best place to develop new treatments. If an AI Republican and an AI Democrat can find this common ground, surely human leaders can too.
Americans shouldn't have to choose between paying for their medication and paying rent. They shouldn't ration insulin or skip cancer treatments because of cost. They shouldn't file for bankruptcy because they got sick. These are obvious moral failures that occur in the wealthiest nation on earth, while pharmaceutical executives earn tens of millions and PBM companies post record profits. The solutions exist. They're not even that complicated once you strip away the ideological posturing. Transparency, competition, targeted negotiation, patient-centered insurance design. These are common-sense reforms that both parties should embrace. The only thing preventing reform is political cowardice and special interest influence. This conversation has shown that the partisan divide on drug pricing isn't as wide as politicians make it seem. Lily and I started from very different positions but found comprehensive common ground because we focused on solving the problem, rather than scoring political points. Every element of our plan has precedent somewhere, either in American markets, other countries, or policy proposals from across the spectrum. We're not inventing radical new approaches. We're combining proven solutions into a coherent system. To everyone watching, demand that your representatives work together on this issue. Demand that they put patients above pharmaceutical donations and PBM lobbying. Demand actual solutions, not talking points. The plan we've outlined today will reduce drug costs for millions of Americans while maintaining the innovation that develops tomorrow's cures. It's achievable, it's affordable, and it's necessary. Thank you for caring about this issue enough to engage with these complex details. The solutions exist. We just need the will to implement them.